And what happens is Avimelech leaves the city of Shechem, as we see in verse 41, and he goes to Arumah.
Hi everyone, our psalm today is chapter 99, Perek Tzadi Tet. This is the 5th chapter of Psalm that we read in Kabbalat Shabbat, and it continues praising God as we've seen in the previous chapters that we've read for Kabbalat Shabbat.
God created the world by words, and thus Judaism became the religion not so much of holy places or holy people or even holy times, as a religion of holy words. God creates the natural universe with words, and we create or damage the social universe with words. In words, we think of possibilities and of futures that have not yet been, and we act to bring them about. That is what makes human beings B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And thus the importance of language and of texts to frame and enlarge our imagination.
Welcome to Bible in the Backyard. Here we are in Jamaica Estates, Queens on a chilly January morning. Why the uniqueness of the offerings that are given on Sukkot?
It's a festival of celebrating the end of hopefully what was a successful agricultural year, and I think that gives a sense of a need for gratitude. So as opposed to Pesach, where the harvest is starting and we're hopeful, Sukkot's now a time to be like, this was great, and here's a lot of Thanksgiving offerings to acknowledge that.
Welcome to Bible in the Bar. Here we are at beautiful Talia Steakhouse on Manhattan's Upper West Side, discussing the book of Deuteronomy with noted author Ruby Namdar. So in your reading of this passage is actually directed towards you, Ruby Namdar, to warn you against your own instincts.
You know what it is? It's the thin line between faith and a prostitutionalized faith.
We're introduced to Hannah, the barren woman who's given a gift by God, a son. She names her son Samuel. Why Samuel? What kind of name is that? We're told that the word Samuel is connected to the word to ask, Sha'al me Hashem. Samuel was her request from God. God granted her request. And the story of the book is how this gift from God gives back to the people.
Hi, my name is Michal Siegal, and I'm professor of Talmud at the Ben-Gurion University of the Negev here in Israel. That was such a wonderful experience talking about the Bible and bringing it to a wider audience, involving my own research. And I'm so grateful to have this incredible initiative organized by 929.
Thank you to our sponsors. 929 is an incredible initiative. The number is taken from the number of chapters in Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and it is an amazing educational platform for exploring Tanakh and all of its facets. It's available in Hebrew and in English, and you're strongly encouraged, if you haven't already, to check out their website and avail yourself of the incredible tools that they put up there.
You asked me about this moment, and I have to say that it feels like a biblical moment. I mean, we are in a time in our life and also in history of the world and in this city, the history of New York, and that is really of biblical proportions.
The world is woven through us, and I cannot forget.
learning Torah, whatever that means, whether it's Torah, Tanakh, Talmud, the entire 2,000 years of Jewish literature, is the thing that gets me through these tough times. We say that Torah Hashem is mishivat nefesh. It is a restorer of the soul. And I hope that today, just by learning a little bit together, we can restore soul.
The fact that the Torah at least 27 times says that you should love the stranger because you yourself were strangers in Egypt. What did that say to you?
I mean, that to me was profoundly moving. Right, Rabbi Shai Held does a beautiful talk about this very topic. And, he makes the point that the stranger is the outsider. It's the person who's not a member, as he says, not a member of the in-group or the kin group, right? And those are the people who are the most vulnerable in any society, including our own today.
Welcome to the Akedah Project.
We invite you to join.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
I'm going to talk today a little bit about one of the beautiful songs or poems by Leonard Cohen, not a very famous one, very important one, I think. This is the story of Isaac.
This past summer, I participated in the Shalom Hartman Institute's Fellowship for Emerging Jewish Thought Leaders. As a part of this program, we were assigned a capstone project to tell our own perspective of a story that happened in the Bible. For my project, I decided to write a slam poem from the perspective of Sarah as her response to the Akedah, because I feel like her story isn't told enough. Here it is. You say you want to hear it from me, because you don't understand why I chose to flee, but if you listen to my story, I can promise and guarantee by the end of it all, you will agree. You see, it started out like any other night. We went to bed as the moon shone bright, but when I woke up, something didn't feel right. Isaac was up before daylight, and he was filled with glee and delight. Abraham was going on a journey, and he finally gave Isaac an invite. And despite the fact that I should trust him above anybody, when I heard him call out to God, Hineni, I couldn't help but see all that we would be if Abraham trusted me like he trusts God Almighty.
As a child, my favorite copy of Megillat Esther was one that Arthur Szyk drew in the 1950s. I used to look at it over and over for days on end as Purim came along. And hearing the Megillah, I would always be the first one to grab it so that I was the one from my family who was holding it.
At its core, the Book of V is a retelling of the Book of Esther, and maybe even more accurately, a midrash on the Book of Esther, given that I approached the original story with a lot of questions and a lot of license.
The Book of Esther has perplexed commentators and scholars throughout the centuries, many seeking to understand its theological import and the reason behind its inclusion in the canon, in the Tanakh.
I see the Bible not just as a religious book for me personally. I see it as a historic book that can guide humanity.
God didn't save the people of Israel because they were chosen people or a special people. God saved them because they were human beings, his creatures, who were being oppressed, who are crying out. And that's a theme that we see throughout the Bible, right? That God hears the cries of the weak, the cries of the oppressed, the cries of the widow, of the orphan, of the stranger. And because of this particular place, you had, one of the strongest kingdoms in the world, which is Egyptian, right, civilization oppressing these Israelites, and God heard them.
Rashi's introduction to the Song of Songs describes the relationship between God and Israel as a beautiful love story. Rashi reads these different songs as referring to different moments in God's complicated relationship with Israel, as described in the Torah.
I'm very excited to reflect a little bit on what our classical traditional sources have to offer us in this time of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Which is visiting us truly like a plague and putting every one of us in a situation of strain.
I'd like to share with you some sources that have preoccupied me as this current plague began to strike. I'm a historian and I study 16th century Jewry. And during the first month of this pandemic, as the term unprecedented was heard again and again, I kept being pulled back to my 16th century sources. The idea that we were dealing with something unprecedented was terrifying, and finding so many discussions in my pre-modern sources that suddenly sounded familiar was strangely reassuring. These texts revealed to me that humanity often had to deal with such challenges, and that they did so with the same strange mix of anxiety, practicality, and hope as I observe among us today.
For me, 9 to 9 is about being forced to slow down. Normally, when I read the Hebrew Bible, I just want to rush ahead. I grasp a storyline and I want to follow all the way through to the conclusion and see how will things come out, how will things evolve by the end of the story. I want to see the grand themes. I want to see the theological language. And then suddenly, through 9 to 9, I find myself forcing myself, or really allowing myself, to see what each chapter can offer me on their own. And suddenly, a lot of little subtle things come to mind, come to our attention. Suddenly, instead of reading the story of Cain and Abel as fast as I can to get to the tragic conclusion and Cain's exile, I can pause and see that there's this moment when Cain says something to Abel, and note that we never find out what it is. Why? Why is there just silence there? Now I carry it with me because I had the time to let it be. Or I read ahead and I get to the first chapter of Samuel, the chapter about the prayer of Hannah for a child and the high priest Eli critiquing her, thinking that she's drunk. Usually I read this chapter as an introduction to the far more meaty and theologically interesting and narratively convoluted chapters that follow about the rise of the kingship and King Saul and King David and the conflicts between them and so on and forth. But being forced to stay in that chapter made me notice that Eli and Hannah, in a sense, encapsulate an eternal struggle. The struggle between the people who are willing to break the status quo, who don't want to accept reality just as it is and want to demand more of it, and the people who want to keep the way things are, keep the norms, keep the conventions, make sure that everything is appropriate and in its rightful, appropriate place. Now, you might think that focusing on the small and allowing ourselves to dwell within the concrete unit that is the chapter would mean, in a sense, losing sight of the bigger picture. But what I found when I allowed myself to make 9 to 9 part of my daily discipline, my daily routine, was that I found the larger themes and the larger stories in the chapter itself. I started seeing how that silence between Cain and Abel plays over and over and over again in relationships between brothers throughout Genesis. I started noticing how this theme of status quo versus breaking it is at the core of the struggles for leadership in the books of Samuel. And amazingly for me, it did the same thing, not only intellectually for me in the way I experience the Bible, but also in the way I experience my people and the Jews all around me in various places of the world. Even though I learned 9 to 9 mostly by myself or with small groups of people, adopting this discipline connected me with Jews all around the world. And for this togetherness, for the ability to discover the large and the connected within the small and the private, I am extremely grateful, and I am hopeful that we can do it many times again.
I am so thrilled to participate in the Siyyum for 9 to 9. I have to say that the process of studying Tanakh systematically with the 929 community was actually more meaningful than I thought it would be. So I have spent my life reading the Torah, reading the Nevi'im, reading some of the Ketuvim. But I have to say, I never did it in a way that was as systematic as reading it from start to finish, because I would sort of parachute into different portions, sometimes into whole books, but I never got the breadth of reading the Torah, then the Nevi'im, then the Ketuvim in that sort of systematic way. And it was meaningful to me in many, many ways. all sorts of portions seem to resonate with me more so, and particularly reading those parts of the Bible that deeply question, what does it mean to be a people? Reading the book of Shmuel, reading both books of Shmuel, and understanding the cross currents of a people that is entirely self-governed versus a people that is governed by a king, versus the checks and balances that the Bible puts in, how those evolve. I just found incredibly meaningful. But I also want to say that for me, there were a host of aha moments that in some cases really changed the way I thought about things. I have to go back even to the very beginning when we were studying as a community Bereshit, and reading and listening to commentators talk about Jacob dreaming about sheep and how he had started his journey by dreaming of angels going up and down from heaven, and how after 17 or so years I'm going to let you edit that, how after his years under Laban, he started dreaming of sheep. And whether you take that dream literally or not, or having actually happened, he was dreaming about sheep. He had gone from spirituality to thinking about entirely economics. His whole life was driven by economics and how we could make a buck. And I have to tell you, it changed to a certain degree my sensitivity in davening, because I suspect I'm not the only one who from time to time lets their mind drift while they're davening. And now, whenever that does it, whenever my mind moves from thinking about what I should be thinking about when I'm davening to thinking about business, to thinking about someone who did something to me in a business transaction or otherwise, I think to myself, you're thinking about sheep. And to me, it's a self-corrective. It's like when you're meditating and you see that your mind is drifting and you bring your mind back to the meditation. And for me, that one, I don't even want to call it an intervention, because it was certainly accidental, but it was just meaningful, and it's changed the way, again, that I daven. So I thank 929. I'm going to hold this process really dear to me for my life. And I'm threatening myself to start a new 929 process for myself in the future, because I really think I'm going to miss very much so this systemic study of the Bible with community. So many best wishes to the entire community. Thank you, 929. Thank you to the teachers, the sponsors, the people behind the scenes, the donors, for making this such a wonderful experience.
Hi, my name is Michal Siegal, and I'm professor of Talmud at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev here in Israel. And I took part in two projects that 929 English organized. One was a close reading and reflection on the book of Esther. I talked about Jews and Christians, and this is my research, and talked about Jews and non-Jews in the book of Esther. That was such a wonderful experience, talking about the Bible and bringing it to a wider audience, involving my own research and reflection about this biblical text. The second project that I took part of was a virtual tour of the Metropolitan Museum using artifacts from the museum to talk about Jews and Christian in the ancient world, my own research. It was such a wonderful experience when hundreds of people from around the world gathered to hear what I had to say based on the text and the artifacts. And I'm so grateful to have this incredible initiative organized by 929, bringing our research, bringing our reflection to the wider audience. And I'm honored to have been asked to participate in those projects. Thank you.
Every single day, I am profoundly connected to you by virtue of studying the same things that you're studying. We may not know each other, we may not be in the same state or in the same country, but the psychic bonds are intense and positive and powerful. When we study, we engage the capacity for the sacred, that chaye sha'ah, the needs of the moment are pushed aside for chaye olam, the needs of eternity, as we touch transcendence. And studying every day allows us to answer in the affirmative one of the two questions I think all of us should ask every day. Number one, did I learn something new today? And number two, did I help someone today? Not only does study impact our intellectual and spiritual makeup, sometimes it inspires us to move from the text to life and help others in need.
When we started 3.5 years ago, learning 929, a group of myself, students of ours at NYU, we didn't think it would become such a huge part of our lives. We didn't think we'd make it to the end. 929 is the number of chapters in the Tanakh. It's also about the number of people who've come in and out of our learning WhatsApp group, 3 WhatsApp groups to be precise. We've had people, I think, on every continent apart from Antarctica and the Arctic. We've had teachers who've included chief rabbis and Israeli Supreme Court justices and artists from the West Village. But more than that, we've had students and everyday people who just in their lives love learning, teaching Tanakh. For me, this has been an experience about bringing people together, people who live close to one another, but people who are all over the world. I'm reminded of a great line that Rabbi Sachs once wrote. He said that the phrase Torah min hashamayim, Torah from heaven, it's less a statement about origin, and just as much its import is that rather than the people being the author of the book is the author of the people. That's been what 929 experience has been for me, that feeling all of us across the world finding ourselves within the great work which is our Tanakh. It's been an amazing ride, and here's to much, much more.
Hello, I'm Sara Levene from Jerusalem. I'm just getting to the end of my first cycle of 929. Lots of other people are going to give you information about the wonderful Torah benefits they've had from doing 929. I've certainly seen passages that I was totally unfamiliar with that have been moving and beautiful and interesting, but I'm going to tell you about some of the fringe benefits. 4 of us have stuck with this since the very beginning together, and I think we're now quite good friends. And I've met lots of other really good people and really interesting people who've come and gone. Some of them are visitors to Jerusalem, and since the time of Zoom, we have someone who joins us from the UK every week as well. So that's been a great experience. I've also used 929 to really help my Hebrew and my Hebrew reading improve. Obviously, I'm living in Israel. I do speak Hebrew to some extent, but we do learn in English. But I've taken to reading everyday's section out loud, which has massively raised my level of Hebrew reading. And I've also learned a lot of vocabulary by trying to look at translations. I have to say that knowing the word for a flock of sheep or a sword isn't that too handy when you go down the supermarket, but nevertheless, it's been a bonus to me. So I would say to anybody who's thinking of doing 929 now, go for it. It's been absolutely great.
What a great project to take the entire Tanakh, 929 chapters, and work through it one per day over the course of 3 years, knowing that people around the world are doing this. The project already existed in Hebrew so that the Israeli and other Hebrew readers of the world could participate, and then to do it in English just opened it up to an entire new community, and it was just wonderful to be a part of it. Unfortunately, I was only a small part of it. I contributed 15 essays at the beginning of the book of Samuel. I wish I could have done more. I'm in the middle of writing a commentary in the book of Samuel, co-authoring a commentary with Moshe Garciel of Bar Ilan University in English. And it's been a pleasure to work through the book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, passage by passage, word by word. And so when the project reached Samuel, I was eager to share much of what I have been working on. The first half of the book of 1 Samuel is mainly my work, and the second half of the book of 1 Samuel was mainly Professor Garciel's work, and then we're going to do the same with 2 Samuel. So I was just pleased to sort of distill findings that one discovers during one's writing of a biblical commentary with a much wider, larger public, taking a passage or a chapter as we went through 1 Samuel 1 through 15. So it was great to be part of it. Full-time teaching, active lecture schedule prevented me from actually doing more. And I do wish I could have done more. So maybe on the next go round, let's do another round of 929. It's always wonderful to be able to revisit these texts. So it was just great to be part of that. Let's see, a theme that I would love for more people to be engaged with. One of the themes of the Tanakh, and it's more of a theme of ancient Israel than the Tanakh per se, but I'll mention it because the Tanakh, of course, is the basis for so much of our knowledge from ancient Israel, folding into that, obviously, the material from archaeology. One thing that gets lost, to my mind, is what did the average person, the average family do on a daily basis? As I like to say when I teach courses on ancient Israel or Introduction to the Bible or ancient Judaism, the average person was not writing the book of Genesis or writing the Psalms or receiving the divine word and then serving as a prophet for the people of Israel. Most people were engaged in day-to-day life, and they did what you and I do. They ate, they slept, they had houses, they had jobs, and so on and so forth. And the number one thing they ate, little known to most people, is bread. We think that grain in some form or another probably comprised anywhere from 2/3 to even 3/4 of the diet of the average ancient Israelite, and in fact, the average ancient Near Easterner in Egypt, in Babylonia, wherever. And much of the work was actually done by women. This is referred to in the Bible in a whole number of passages, especially the grinding of grain into flour. This was done by women using millstones. Various biblical passages to that effect. I'll mention one in just a moment. And then, of course, shaping the loaves and baking the loaves. And this took up so much a part of one's daily life, especially in the household with the women, that we actually get English expressions, the daily grind, which does not refer to coffee, but refers to the grain that was milled into flour that was then baked into bread. The most famous passage is the anticipation of the 10th plague in the book of Exodus, where it states that the firstborn of Egypt will die. From the firstborn of the Pharaoh down to the firstborn of the handmaiden who is behind the millstones, which is to say the highest ranking firstborn, the crown prince, down to the lowest ranking firstborn, which would be a son of a handmaiden who was spending her day grinding grain into flour. And then so many other biblical passages which refer to women and the grinding of grain. So this is so much a part of ancient Israel, and we lose sight of it. We lose track of it. And I always introduce that into my teaching. It's one of the themes that I think we always have to consider based on the what I stated at the outset. Most people were not writing biblical books or producing great art or architecture. Most people were going about their daily lives, and that's something I always like to share with people. So an entire world opens up when you begin to consider everything from plowing and seeding and harvesting And once you get the grain, you have to winnow and thresh and do all sorts of other things, which, by the way, is there are 11 stages to get from farm to table, as it were, to use the modern expression. And those 11 stages are outlined actually in the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, because those 11 labors are prohibited on Shabbat, and therefore you get a listing of all the 11, many of which I have just mentioned to you: threshing, winnowing, and so on. The connection between the biblical text and the Jewish people is so obvious, but we do lose sight of it from time to time. If we go back to ancient Israel, I inhabit the world of ancient Israel. If we go back to ancient Israel, this wasn't the case, because the religion was very much temple-centered. The engagement with the divine was through the sacrifices offered by the priesthood, first in the tabernacle, later in the temple, the first temple, then the second temple. It's only in the very late biblical period, and certainly in the post-biblical period, where we have what's called the textualization of Judaism, if I can use that term, as other scholars have, and eventually, of course, the canonization of the biblical text, first the Torah, then the prophets, and then the writings. So we take it for granted because we've been doing this for 2,000 years, but it's not actually true of ancient Israel, as I've just indicated. And so we really need to think about that. And it has something to do with the pliability, is that a word? Or the flexibility of the Jewish religion, that it can actually segue from this temple-centered ritual to a text-centered ritual. And every Shabbat in the synagogue, when we read Torah, and then the Haftarah, the prophetic portion after it, I don't take it for granted that this is something that is just built into the religion, because it obviously required an entirely new understanding of the way a people can relate to a text, and through that text to experiencing the divine. I want to make it clear that this had nothing to do with destruction of the temple. That impelled the whole process further, but the reading of the Torah and the prophets is already built into the Jewish system even before the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, as we know from texts of that time period. The highlight for me in the entire process of doing 929 and my involvement with the project was obviously, as was writing the 15 essays that I did for 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 15, but also just simply reading what others wrote. I will admit to not having read every day, every chapter, and everybody's essays, but I would, on a semi-quasi-regular basis, have a peek, look in, see who's writing what. Sometimes a colleague that I know, sometimes a colleague whom I don't know. And it was just always wonderful to gain new insights, and also to know that so many people around the world were doing this. And if I can just give the pride of place to being a parent, knowing that my own son was one of the thousands, tens of thousands who was proceeding on a daily basis. And we would, of course, talk from time to time or email from time to time about a particular thing that somebody said. So it was always nice to know that my son was also out there participating in the project.
One of the greatest parts of 929 is obvious just from its name. The fact that 929 breaks the Tanakh into 929 chapters. This isn't the traditional Jewish way of breaking up the Tanakh. Usually we break it up by parsha or by narrative chunk. But chapter by chapter, this breaking up of the text allows us to see things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. You get to zoom in on just this chapter and perhaps see things that wouldn't be obvious when you read Tanakh in other iterations. 929 breaks the Tanakh into 929 chapters, and in so doing, shows us things that we wouldn't see otherwise. And then, when you combine that with all of the amazing contributors and writers who give their unique take on just this chapter, well, all of a sudden 929 has offered us something that we've never seen before. In all of our years of studying Tanakh, 929 has brought a new take to this text.
Shalom, friends. Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson here from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, American Jewish University in Los Angeles. I've had the pleasure with you of participating in 929's study of the entire Tanakh. And I have a couple thoughts about this extraordinary book of ours that connects the Jewish people across the ages, links us to God, and gives us a sense of purpose and place and direction. And I want to frame it in terms of a comparison. I've been also reading Homer's Iliad. And the Iliad, written at the same time as the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, so from roughly the same era and from the Eastern Mediterranean, is so starkly different in some key ways. The first, it's a book only about men and only about nobility. There are no common people. There are no women who are real characters. Everything is about men and men's values at the highest level of society. The rich and the powerful are the only object of concern. The gods weigh in, but they weigh in as petty as the Greeks that they're about. Everyone is concerned about honor and glory and who gets killed and who doesn't get killed, and you show your glory by who you kill. And of course, anyone who's familiar with Tanakh knows that this revolutionary book is about common men and women and about how holiness flows through the choices of a covenanted people to all humanity. So this radical book says that you don't have to be rich and powerful to be significant, and that glory is found not by the lives you take, but by the lives you give, by the goodness you provide. In fact, God says through the prophet Jeremiah, don't glorify in your wealth or in your power or even in your wisdom, but glory in this, that I, the Lord, delight in righteousness and decency and justice. That's the revolution of Tanakh, and we've had the chance to benefit from it as a group and as a people. So my blessing for all of us is that our study of this sacred, ancient, and radical book is launched, not ended by the end of this effort, and that we continue to be the people who strive after chesed, umishpat, utzedek, that these are the values that continue to drive us as they drove our ancestors and as they please the Holy One, whose gift this book is. Shalom.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Benstein, and I am the editor of the 929 English Language website. And I'd like to share with you some of my feelings as we finish this first grand cycle of all 929 chapters of the Tanakh. And I have to say, I do a little bit of jogging, but I've never been a marathon runner. And this feels like we're finishing a marathon, and we get a day off only to begin again on the following Sunday, going back to the beginning with Genesis chapter 1. So as the editor, I want to say one of my favorite things about my work in 929 has been pretty much getting up every morning and opening my email and finding in my inbox anywhere from 2, 3, 4 to a dozen submissions from people who write for us, writers, artists, also we've had podcasters and musicians, and just the breadth and diversity of material and the people who have been attracted to this project is just breathtaking. I mean, if I didn't have that daily shot of energy of these people, some of whom have written quite a bit, and so I'm curious to see what they're going to say now about this new chapter, or some of whom I get a first submission and I'm just getting to know them, then my job, having a daily deadline, having every single day, or at least 5 days a week, having to put up new materials and make sure that the site is updated, that everything graphically looks okay, that there are no technological glitches, et cetera, would be just so exhausting and wearing. And yet here we are coming to the end. It's been 3.5 years. 186 weeks, and I feel like it could be at the very beginning, just because one of the amazing things about 929 is also that we are reading every single one of these chapters. And I used to think that I had a pretty good Jewish education, but here we are in 2nd Chronicles. It is a book that I have never cracked, okay? I've never read, I don't think I've ever gotten to the very end of the Tanakh. And so this system of reading a chapter a day, rain or shine, up or down, from the very beginning to the very end, is amazing because it doesn't allow you to cherry pick, to just read the chapters that you agree with or that are fun or that are interesting or that you're familiar with. It really pushes you to get through. There are definitely some tough spots. You know, it's like a hike that sometimes goes through a dry desert and mountain peaks, but there are also the beautiful lakes and green leafy forest. I mean, there's all the different kinds of landscapes, and it's amazing going through it day by day. Sometimes it's encountering completely unfamiliar materials. Sometimes it's reading a chapter that you thought you'd never study, but then there is this amazing insight of a familiar verse or a familiar scene that you know from somewhere else. So I just think that the whole idea of 929, that it basically has two parts, right? It has the system of reading a chapter a day, 5 chapters a week, 929 chapters, 3.5 years. But then there's also the website, which was really my little bailiwick, which is we invite people of all stripes. And when I say all, I really mean all, from radical secular through all the various denominations and belief stances and Jewish lifestyle choices through to Orthodox, from, primarily from North America, but certainly we've had representatives from pretty much all of the English-speaking diaspora, as well as English speakers from Israel. We have, of course, women and men, of course, straight and gay and non-binary, and just about anybody, any kind of interaction with the text that you could think of. We probably have somebody who's written from that point of view. Over 500 authors, close to 10,000 pieces, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just, I just feel very blessed and privileged to have been able to be a part of this. And I really look forward to see where it's going to go. It's kind of like a spiral, because here we are back at the beginning. We're at a very different place than we were when we started. So it's like coming around again, but on a higher level. And I can't say, I can't really say enough how crucial I think this is, because the two parts of the system, the two parts of the project means that even if you don't sit down and read a chapter a day, I realize that kind of discipline is not for everybody. It's not quite as challenging as Daf Yomi, the daily study page for the Talmud, but it does have its rigors. We, of course, make it as accessible as possible on the website. You can read it in English and Hebrew. You can listen to it in English and Hebrew in podcast form. And then, of course, some question comes up, some things you want to look into, we have all those posts on the site. You can delve to your heart's content. So in that respect, like I said, even if you don't do the chapter a day, but you're interested in learning more about, I don't know, the character of David, or the idea of leadership in the Bible, or what are some of the great love stories in the Tanakh, or a holiday is coming up and it's Pesach and you read Song of Songs, Shira Shirim, or it's Sukkot and Ecclesiastes, and boy, those 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes are pretty challenging. Well, sit down with 929 and you get a huge head start in really understanding what it's all about.
שלום ללומדי 929, The Anglos. אני מאוד מאוד שמח לברך את כולכם על סיום המסע, הסיבוב הראשון באנגלית, השני בעברית, של כל 929 הפרקים. המילים שאני רוצה לשלוח לכם לקוחות מבראשית י"ב, בהם הקדוש ברוך הוא אומר לאברהם, לך לך, מארצך, ממולדתך, מבית אביך, ואעשך לגוי גדול ואברכך, והיה ברכה. כשמסתכלים על התרגום לאנגלית ל"והיה ברכה", כתוב, You will become a blessing. אבל אני חושב ש"והיה ברכה" זה לא ברכה לאברהם, but you should be. הציווי לאברהם it's an order. אתה תהיה ברכה. להיות ברכה זה לתת את כל האנרגיה שיש לך, את כל הטוב שיש לך, את כל מה שקיבלת, תעביר את זה הלאה. ואני רוצה לברך אתכם, כל מי שעשה את הסיבוב הזה, להמשיך הלאה והלאה והלאה, ונברחו בנו, כאן בארץ ובכל העולם כולו, כל משפחות האדמה. שעה טובה.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shira Hecht-Koller, Director of Education for 929 English. It is a delight and a deep honor to be able to celebrate with so many of you today as we complete this milestone of learning all of Tanakh together, day after day, chapter after chapter, parak after parak over the past 3.5 years. As we learn the very last parak together and embark upon our Siyyum, I wanted to share a thought with you and reflect together on an image that for me represents the places that a broad and rich study of Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, can take us. To do that, I want to bring you to a moment several years ago where I found myself in an unlikely place reflecting on the power of texts and the role they play in framing our world. A bit more than 6 years ago, on a spring afternoon in a gallery installation at MassMoCA, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, a converted warehouse in North Adams, Massachusetts, an enormous and inspiring place in the Northern Berkshires, I was at an exhibit called Bibliotechophilia. The exhibit explored the medium and ethos of libraries, the way they combine public and private spheres, afford an opportunity for escapism, and serve as warehouses and storehouses, not just for physical books, but also for experiences and knowledge. In one particular work, the artist Jenna Prieb used books deaccessioned from libraries to create an immersive piece consisting of swirling streams of pages jumping from the books themselves, rising into the air, seemingly defying the laws of physics. I stood there looking at the flying pages, moving in all directions, bursting forth into the world, and suddenly and very palpably felt that this piece in many ways embodied what it means to engage holistically with texts, and how one central rooted text, the 929 chapters of Tanakh, bursts forth and animates the world with its beauty, its wonder, its paradoxes, inconsistencies, intricacies, opportunities for reflection, and its mandate as we are created in the image of God that we always be creating. Tanakh is the starting point for framing ideals and values and serves as an anchor for Jewish identity for so many. But also, in addition to being an anchor, it is a sail that can be filled with air and take us to all sorts of unknown places. It is a text that emerges and flies into the world and can be used as a point of contact for nearly everything and everyone around us. I view myself, as I am sure many of you learning with us today do as well, as standing in the middle of that matrix of people, of ideas, of values, texts, and experiences, working to connect them in varied and creative ways. The points of access and web of connections are not always obvious or natural, but they are limitless. The study of a parak, a chapter of Tanakh, has the capacity to bring together voices of scholars, rabbinic leaders, artists, intellectuals, musicians, historians, graphic designers, poets, students, novelists, photographers, playwrights, filmmakers, politicians, doctors, bankers, teachers, lawyers, archaeologists, lyricists, university presidents, and kindergarten children, who are all reflecting on the same words. It is a democratized space and a creative space. It is an inspiring space. At times, the idea of walking into the world free of narratives, history, traditions, and expectations feels quite alluring. It embodies Spinoza's ideal, an ideal of unrootedness and a view from nowhere, which in many ways is very freeing. For most people, myself included, however, engaging with the world in that way is not plausible. We need anchoring and framing to view every aspect and detail of our world. Ultimately, learning and teaching are ways to situate that anchor, providing the portal through which to access one's identity and enabling individuals to discover their place in the larger grand narrative of life. This feels particularly resonant at this moment of disruption, where we can't physically access all the people we want to be with and the places to which we want to go. But as we know, the text has the power not just to take us places, but also to draw us in, to ground us, to connect us in ways that we might have thought were unimaginable before we were isolated in our homes. The profound power of a shared common narrative, a common story that brings us together, is what we celebrate in this community-wide Siyyum today. And we at 929 feel grateful and lucky to be a part of it. Thank you for the opportunity to build, grow, and learn together. Special thanks and much gratitude to all our learners and our contributors, our writers and our artists, our team, and to our Siyyum sponsors, Nicole and Renan Agus, for the many ways they support 929 English and for their dedication to spreading Torah far and wide. We're very grateful. Mazel tov, everyone. Congratulations. If you got to this point, you made it. It's an honor now to turn over to Rabbi Adam Mintz, Director of 929 English, who will introduce the next component of our Siyyum.
Thank you, Shira, and it's great to see everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Moshe Sokolow. Rabbi Sokolow is the Fania Gottesfeld-Heller Professor of Jewish Education and Director of Doctoral Programs at the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education at Yeshiva University. He's author of several books, including In the Company of Prophets, published by Kodesh Press in conjunction with 929 English. He's been teaching a weekly Parsha class at Lincoln Square Synagogue since 1985. And we are honored that Rabbi Sokolow has written for 929 English on every single chapter of Tanakh, beginning with the book of Joshua. It's an honor to introduce Rabbi Moshe Sokolow, who will complete Tanakh.
Thank you, Rabbi Mintz. Welcome to our Siyyum Tanakh. The Tanakh, as we know it today, ranges from Bereshit, Genesis, through Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles. There is some literary evidence that the book of Kohelet actually once occupied the last position in Tanakh. Witness its next to the last verse that warns against making too many books. While the beginning, Bereshit, is a logical and reasonable place to start, what does the choice of Divrei Hayamim as its conclusion communicate? Let's take a look at the next to the last verses in our Tanakh. Vayisrafu et Beit HaElohim, vayenatetzu et chomat Yerushalayim, v'chol armenoteha sarefu va'esh, v'chol klei machamadeha lahashchit. Vayegel hashe'erit min hacherev el Bavel, vayihiyulo ulevanav la'avadim, ad meloch malachut paras. L'malot devar Adonai b'fi Yirmiyahu, ad ratzita ha'aretz et shabbatoteha. Kol yemei hashama shavata l'malot shiv'im shana. The temple, the Beit HaElohim, was burned. The walls of Jerusalem were torn down. Its inhabitants were sent into exile in Babylonia, where they became the slaves and the servants of the kings of Babylonia until the rise of the Persian kingdom. All this in fulfillment of the word of God as spoken by the prophet Yirmiyahu, that the land needed to repay the Sabbaths, the Shabbatot. As long as it lay desolate, it kept the Shabbat until the 70 years to the destruction of the temple, as forecast by Yirmiyahu, were completed. This passage essentially constitutes an explicit declaration of divine providence in history, a theme that underscores rabbinic interpretation of Scripture. But this is neither the end of the text, nor for that matter, the end of the story. Uvishnat achat lechoresh melech paras. In the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, lichlot devar Adonai b'fi Yirmiyahu, he'ir Adonai et ruach koresh melech paras, vaya'aver kol b'chol malachuto v'gam b'michtav lemor. He issued a declaration, both orally and in written form, saying, Ko amar koresh melech paras, kol mamlechot ha'aretz natan li Adonai Elohei hashamayim, v'hu fakad alai livnot lo vayit b'Yerushalayim asher b'Yehuda. Nivachem mikol amo, Adonai Elohav imo v'ya'al. Cyrus, the king of Persia, acknowledged that his domination was due to the fact that God had turned all the kingdoms of the earth over to him, and that somehow this obligated him to build a house to God in Jerusalem. So he called upon anyone who was a member of the people of God, that would be the Jewish people, to return to Jerusalem and to participate in the rebuilding of the temple. This postscript to history, which is not coincidentally also the first two verses in the book of Ezra signifies that the rabbinic overseers of the process of canonization, of the completion of Tanakh, wanted to stipulate that, as the Bible scholar Nachum Sarna put it, the consummation of history involves the ideal of the return of the Jewish people to its land, of the restoration of Jewish sovereignty, and of spiritual renewal. I would like to extend my personal thanks to Rabbi Mintz and to Shira Hecht-Koller and to Jeremy Benstein for all the assistance and opportunities that they have provided me over these past months and years to share my appreciation and love of Tanakh with all of you.
Thank you, Rabbi Sokolow, for those words, for closing Tanakh with us, and for all of your insights, contributions, and reflections over the course of our cycle of study. You've enriched all of us individually and collectively with your scholarship and your dedication to the study of Tanakh, and for that, we're so grateful. Now we will be reciting a Hadran for the Siyyum Tanakh, a particular and special text of completion and of closing. We'll share it on the screen with everyone. Rabbi Mintz and I will read it together as we celebrate and mark this milestone.
Hadran alach 24 sifrei hatanach vehadrach alan. Da'atan alach 24 sifrei hatanach v'da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma hadain v'lo ba'alma da'ate.
We will return to you 24 books of Tanakh, and you will return to us. Our mind is on you, 24 books of Tanakh, and your mind is on us. We will not forget you, 24 books of Tanakh, and you will not forget us. Not in this world and not in the next world.
Vihi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu. Asher bachar b'neviim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet. Shebischut mikra'ei kodesh uvischut psukehem v'tevotehem v'otiotehem u'nekudotehem v'ta'amehem v'shemot hakedoshim hayotzim mehem uvischut nevi'ei ha'emet shovtei Yisrael v'tzadikei hadorot hamuskarim b'sifrei hatanach. Niskel liyot noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu, u'maaseh yadeinu konena aleinu, u'maaseh yadeinu konenehu.
May it be your will, our God, and the God of our ancestors, who chose good prophets and was pleased with their words, which were spoken in truth, that in the merit of the Holy Scriptures and in the merit of their verses and their words and their letters and their vowels and their cancellation signs and the holy names which emerge from them, and in the merit of the truthful prophets, the judges of Israel, and the righteous of every generation who are mentioned in Tanakh, may we merit that the graciousness of the Lord our God be upon us, establish upon us the work of our hands, and may the work of our hands establish it for you.
Le'orer eim habanim smecha, u'liyached sod Torah shebichtav, im sod Torah shebal peh, b'yichud hashlim, b'yahava v'achava v'reyut, ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav, Yamshich aleinu shefa or hachayim lanefesh ruach uneshama laha'arich yameinu bitov uvirat Hashem kol hayamim v'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzaeinu v'tze'etzaei tze'etzaeinu v'tze'etzaei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei toratecha lishma.
To awaken the joyous mother of children and to unite the secret of the written Torah with the secret of the oral Torah in complete unity with love and friendship and camaraderie. May God, faithful in all God's words, draw down upon us the abundant light of life for the soul, spirit, and inner being, to extend our days in goodness and in the fear of God for all days. May the Lord our God make the words of your Torah pleasing in our mouth and in the mouths of all of Israel, that we and our descendants and our descendants' descendants and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, all know your name and learn your Torah lishma, for its own sake. Mazal tov, everyone. If you've been learning with us the entirety of Tanakh, or even just one parak, or perhaps maybe just one pasuk, we're grateful for all the learning, for the community that's been built, and particularly at this time, for all of us to bring together so many voices and so much celebration from all corners of the world. And we look forward to much continued learning and celebration together in good health and in good spirit. Mazal tov, and thank you.
Mazal tov.
Mazal tov.
And study groups at night, the classes that are taught and the Torah we write.